Now, what did you just hear? Anger? Frustration? Condemnation? Have you ever noticed that sometimes parents ask their children stupid questions? Have you ever noticed that? Like, do you want a smack? As if any thoughtful child would go, that's interesting. Yeah, 2. I need 2 because I'm being naughty now, but I'm going to do some stuff a bit later, and so I'll take that one in advance, and then we've got it over and done with. Now, in the middle of this reading, I don't know if you noticed it, there appear to be some foolish questions. Should you be beaten anymore? Why persist in your rebellion? But actually, these questions aren't foolish at all. What God is saying is, look, every time you try to break my law, you're breaking yourself while proving it in the process. Look, has anyone ever lied to you? Have you ever been betrayed by a friend? Has anyone ever stolen from you or misled you? Did it hurt? Every single time we go against what he wants, we get hurt. And God is not speaking with frustration here. He is pleading with his people. He says, why do you want to be beaten again? Why do you want to persist in this rebellion? Look at what's happening to you. Look at what's happening to you. You are so damaged and broken right now. Why keep doing that? Look at what's happening around your neighbors. Look at all the pain they're going through. Why would you want to continue with that? Look at your city. Look at your nation. Look at the world and your relationship with other nations. Can you not see all of this that you're doing is hurting? Why keep going that way? This is not a stupid question. This is actually very profound. Which is why a little bit later in Isaiah chapter 1 in verse 18, God says, come now, let us reason together. Though your sins be like scarlet, though your rebellion against me literally runs like blood, we can make it white as snow. Let us find a way to reconcile and bring all of this back together. The tone in this passage isn't one of frustration or anger. It's one of someone pleading. Just take a moment. Think about what you're doing. Where is all of this going? So I said the biblical narrative is a loving God creates a loving world. He gives it all of the conditions and everything it needs to experience and express love. But instead of embracing him and what he gave us, we've broken his law and we lead broken lives. We are genuinely hurt in all kinds of ways. We see the suffering in the lives of other people. We see the suffering in ourselves. It's very often hard to talk about it. Have you noticed that? Have you ever seen someone fall in love with someone who you know is using them, for example, to go back to our previous example? You know they care desperately for this person. This other person's treating them like dirt. Everyone can see it apart from them. Have you ever had a friend go through that experience? Okay, feel free to be interactive and raise your hand. Have you ever tried talking to them? Put up your hand if you ever tried talking to a friend who you can see is just going down a disastrous course of action. You want to speak to them, right? Keep your hand in the air if the conversation went well. It's very hard, isn't it? Because all kinds of things kick in at that point, all kinds of defensiveness. No, you don't understand me. You don't know what it's like. It has to be like this. How can you possibly get this so wrong? You're coming with the best intention in the world to say, look, I think this person's actually doing something to you I don't want to see done. But it's so often, isn't it, when we're on the receiving end of that, just to push it away. But actually, that's exactly what's being described to us here. A loving God who actually loves us, who created this world for love, saying, look at the damage that's happening as you go your own way. The very things that make love possible and real are the very things that we can use to make things go so horribly wrong. And it's not just that we've broken his law and we have broken lives, but we live in a broken world. We see the effects of this around us all of the time. One of the hardest talks I was ever asked to give, I think, in the context of this university was at the Oxford Union shortly after the tsunami. I don't know if any of you can remember back that far. For me, everything is recent. I keep saying I recently spoke on that. But in this context, I think some of you would have been in primary school when those events took place, so you may not remember. But it was catastrophic. They asked if I would speak on something like God and the tsunami, and my initial response was to say, look, I'm not comfortable with the title because it sounds like we're trying to attract an audience off the back of a disaster where hundreds of thousands of people died. And I just don't know if that's the right thing to do. How about I just speak on God and suffering, and within the context, I promise I'll address that issue. And as we began to just look at all of that, I said, you know, what I find very interesting is if I saw a world that was in contradiction to the Bible. In other words, if I saw a world where Jesus said, hey, the world looks like this, but actually it looked very different, I would have a king-size problem. Does that make sense? Jesus said the world looks like this, the world actually looks like that. If he's meant to be God, how can they be in contradiction? I have a problem. I said, but if I see a world which looks exactly as he described it to me, I don't sit around saying, gosh, I have a huge problem, trying to reconcile these two, I now sit around saying, what does this mean? How do I understand that? In Luke 21, and there's a copy of the Gospel of Luke on your table called Uncover, and you can take it away if you don't have it. Please go and read it. You'll see Jesus Christ says there will come a time on earth when the nations will be in anguish and perplexity at the raging and the tossing of the sea. Now, it's normally captains of boats who live in perplexity and fear of the raging and tossing of the sea, but not nations in the plural. So when I see things happen in this world that Jesus Christ told me would happen, it doesn't allow me to doubt him. Rather, it does raise questions where I say, what does all of this actually mean? We live in a world where we are reaping the consequences of what we do and how we live. Actually, we won't have time to go into that. Let me skip over that. But not only have we broken his law, we live in broken lives, we live in a broken world, we also see this as broken God's heart. Also in the Gospel of Luke, if you read that account, you'll see Jesus at one point says, look, I long to gather you together in my embrace, like a hen gathers her chicks, but you're not willing to come to me. He says, but you don't come. There's another time where Jesus just simply breaks down in tears and cries. It's the shortest verse in the whole Bible. Jesus wept. We read that not only did all of this, a loving God create all of this, set it up for one way, but we're possible of taking it in a totally another way. We also read that this actually hurt God himself. Now, this raises a very important question, which I'm not going to have time to go into in great detail, which is, well, why bother then? If it's the case that for this kind of loving world that we have that seems so essential to meaningful existence, all these other things are also out there as well, then surely it's better not to create in the first place. Now, there are two challenges as soon as we raise that question. Whenever we compare one thing to another thing, we can do that. We need a standard by which to make the comparison, and we need two things to compare between. So if I were to say to you, hey, look, my Bentley is better than your Skoda, and I don't have a Bentley, but you can always live in hope, I suppose, of destroying the environment. So if I make that statement, well, we've got two states of existence to compare, and then I suppose I use some kind of criteria to decide between them. But how do you compare existence with non-existence? It's very complicated. And when you say it would be better for me not to exist, why is the non-existent you more happier and thinks it's a better state to be in than the existent you? So there is a problem we have even as we raise the question just at a basic linguistic level, but there's something else that's very important here, because the implication seems to be, well, God had to do this, and then it all went wrong, so let's blame him. But there's no need for God to actually create anything at all. That's the wrong question to ask. I said earlier that love is a relational quality. It only exists between personal beings. When my first daughter was born, because people knew I loved books, everyone gave her books. And one of the books I got given was actually written by a Christian, and it was called Someone to Love. And it basically said, there was this God, he was all alone, he wanted someone to love, he created a beautiful blue and green planet, he put people on it, and now he finally had someone to love. Now, this book was not laid aside lightly, it was thrown with great force, and it went straight into the bin. Because whatever narrative that is, that's not a Christian narrative. It may be true in other systems that God needs to create life in order to experience love, because love is a quality that exists between personal beings, but the God of the Bible is actually Trinitarian. 3 persons in one Godhead. God exists in a set of living, loving relationships. He doesn't need to create life in order to express and experience love. He is love in his very nature, and out of that he creates life. So there is no need. As a matter of fact, it's even more profound than that, because we're actually told that even before God laid the foundations of the world, he knew what it was going to cost him to put this world right. There's a rather incredible verse in the book of Revelation that says, before the foundations of the world were laid, before even principles were put into effect that would actually make creation possible, God knew what it would cost him in order to rescue it. He knew it would go wrong, and he knew what it would cost. And that price he was prepared to pay was not a small one. Now, the way we determine in economics about how valuable something is to you is the price you're prepared to pay for it. Okay, so this is my wedding ring. It's gold, or at least that's what the person who sold it to me said it was. Someone said it's a small band of metal that cuts off your circulation. Now, this has value, but not because it's rare. This has value because someone's prepared to pay for it in economics. If nobody wanted gold, if no one was prepared to pay for it, the value of this would be, well, zero. Nobody wants it. There's no demand, quite literally. So it has no value. We determine economic value by the price we're prepared to pay for something. And we see something about the value that God was prepared to pay for us, because the price he was prepared to pay to rescue us out of this state we find ourselves in was the highest possible price he could have paid. Even before God created this world, he did know it would go wrong. And he knew what it would take to put it right. He himself came into this world in the person of Jesus Christ, and he took on into his body everything that's gone wrong in ours. All the wrong things we've done, all the bad things that we've said or committed, all of the consequences that flow from that, all of that he took on into himself. He was willing to give himself up to death on the cross. So even though we may have broken his law and we live broken lives and we live in a broken world, on the night that Jesus Christ was betrayed, he took a loaf of bread, held it in front of a group of people and said, "This is my body broken for you." And he took on the consequences of the brokenness of this world into himself and laid down his life. If God exists, do you think gold means anything to him? The price that God was prepared to pay to rescue us was the highest possible price he could have paid. There is nothing greater or bigger he could have given than to get us out of the mess we find ourselves in. He himself literally is willing to pay that price. And the consequences that he then invites us into relationship with him. This is what it says elsewhere in the Bible. It says, "This is how God showed his love among us. He sent his one and only Son into the world that we might live through him. And this is love, not that we love God, but that he loved us and sent his Son into this world as a sacrifice for our sin." That's why elsewhere in the Bible we talk about the fact that if you actually turn to Christ, there is this living hope that you can actually receive from him. I started off by saying that we live in a world where basically all of our relationships are morally conditioned, because they are. Every friendship we have represents a group of people that we can morally trust. Every relationship we have where there's deep love is reflected in commitment. And what we read in the Bible is Jesus Christ is committed to us to the point where he's willing to lay down his life to take on to himself what we ourselves have done wrong, where he's willing to be broken on our behalf. And he comes to us and he offers us the possibility of a new beginning with him. The way you receive forgiveness if you have morally offended or done something wrong to someone else is very simple. You say, "I'm sorry." And then if the party's willing to forgive you, you at that point receive their forgiveness into your life. And it's amazing. I don't know if you've ever offended someone, apologized, and they've forgiven you. It's amazing. The next time you walk into a room, even if they're like 20 meters away, you can look at them for 1 nanosecond and know if you've been forgiven. Have you ever had that experience? It's incredible. If they haven't forgiven you, you can walk into the same room the next day, look at them 20 meters away and know that there's still a problem. And this loving God who created this loving world longs to have a relationship with us. He paid the price. He's made it possible. He knew what was coming. And he even offers us forgiveness as a gift and says, if you're willing to say sorry for the part you've played in this, I will forgive you. And we look forward to a time when there will be a new heaven and a new earth, and God will literally bring about a new world for us to live in. Why continue in our rebellion? Why persist? Well, this is why the idea of repentance and faith is right at the very center of the Christian faith. All of us have done things wrong. All of us. We've all failed in our life, without exception. If you're sat here today and you believe you're perfect, the only way out of that state of self-deception is to get married. All of us. God loves this world. He created it. He put it here. He made love possible. Even though we have broken that, all of the conditions and rules that make that love possible, he came into this world and was broken for us. He offers us forgiveness as a gift. He's willing to forgive. And the way you receive anyone's forgiveness, whether it's divine or human, is simply by saying sorry. And when you do, two things happen. You know the peace of release from the things you've done wrong, and you suddenly now find yourself in a relationship that is utterly amazing. And that's what's on offer here.